All right, so you asked for it and I'm bringing it. The SQL Connector and special guest MVP Ahmad Najjar. He's gonna take us through all the actions, all the triggers, and give you demos on how to use each one. All right, and so I am here with the man, MVP, legend, solution builder, genius, my bro, Ahmad Najjar. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm good.
Oh, good.
I miss you,
Ahmad,
man.
I miss you, bro. We had some time together. If you guys haven't seen the video, go check it out. We had some time together in Oslo in October. Made a rad video about that. It was quite an interesting journey, but we haven't seen each other since, so it's a little bit of a reunion.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
True that.
Okay, so I put out the call to the community and said, I am thinking about doing a connector series for Flow and X connector. What do you guys want to see? And Ahmad called out like, hey man, a lot of people are asking for the SQL connector, and I would love to partner with you and make that video. And so, of course, you know me, if I don't have to do the work, I'm happy to just make the video. And so absolutely took Ahmad up on that. And so for those of you that don't know Ahmad, I'm going to actually let him introduce himself in just a second. He's going to take it away with his slide deck, but he's going to go over the SQL connector, how to use it, like how to connect to it. He's even going to show you like how to start out with some prerequisite steps and then all the actions and triggers and some bonus material. I'm not going to spoil it. He'll take you through it. So without further ado, my bro, Ahmad, take it away, man.
All right. Thank you, John. So we start by Microsoft Flow's SQL connector. So my name is Ahmad Najjar. That's how it's actually pronounced. You could call me Ahmad. That's all right. I'm cool with it.
That's what I do. I'm American. I can't say it's not a sound that we make very well.
That's all right. That's all right. So just call me Ahmad. I'm cool with that. My Twitter handle and my blog. So that's something that probably you follow me on Twitter. I just tweet a lot. And so we kick off by the agenda. So first of all, we just do a small introduction about SQL with a really small demo, just trying to get things straight, give you a crystallized idea about what we're trying to connect against, what is a SQL server. Most of us know this as a database engine, yes, but we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, how to set up stuff. If you're a power user, probably you're familiar with that. Connector creation, because we're trying to connect against the database, and we're just going to show you how we're going to create that in Flow. SQL connector triggers, of course. SQL connector actions, and we're going to see a lot of that, and then lots of demos. So that's going to be awesome. And at the end, we're going to just talk about the known issues and limitations, something very important when you're trying to connect against something, to know the issues and limitations so you know what you're signing up for.
Totally.
All right. So about me on the fly. So as I said before, I'm Ahmad Najjar, so the Flow Jedi. I'm based in Oslo, in Norway. I'm a senior consultant at InfoWorker and a business applications MVP. Passionate, enthusiastic developer, heart and soul. So basically, I just work in development. Over 14 years of experience working with SharePoint and ASP.NET, different technologies. Mainly right now, work with SharePoint, PMP, and PowerShell. But when I'm not doing that, I'm actually working with Flow and Power Apps and Logic Apps, which is actually my fun part of the day. And I'm also a co-organizer for the SQL, for the SharePoint Saturday, not the SQL Saturday, the SharePoint Saturday in Oslo. Here. So first of all, just a quick introduction. So what is Microsoft SQL Server? Is a relational database management system developed by Microsoft. So you store your data within the database. Usually a relational database management system is something that's very sophisticated, just consists of a lot of functionalities, a lot of stuff that you could build up a rational, strong, robust management system for your data. Connect to SQL. Yeah,
real quick, in plain English, real quick, for the average user, a relational database just means that I have fields in my database, like an Excel table, and I can actually relate those things together. I can say that like my name, my first name and last name are part of like a count, right? And so I can relate fields together and say that this belongs to this. And so I just want to make sure that if you don't know what SQL is at all, you at least have that base level understanding of what a relational database is.
Exactly. And with that, we jump to the next point, which is connecting to SQL Server to manage data. So how we connect to SQL Server. So with the cloud, movement, so we have two ways to connect to SQL Server databases. So we have an Azure SQL database, which you don't have to build the server itself, but rather than that, you build the database within the cloud. So that's an Azure SQL database. And that's basically most of our demos are, but we're trying to do is actually against an Azure SQL database. Most of the time, they look the same as the one on-prem, which is a regular SQL server. That's something you need to install. You need to do everything yourself. Even if you like, probably you would find ready machines on Azure, and when you create that machine in Azure, it's still on-prem, though it's in the cloud, but it's still on-prem because that applies to all the characteristics applies to it as if it is on-prem. But instead of using your prem, you're using Microsoft's prem. So we get that out of the way.
Data in the cloud is just data on someone else's computer, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the next one, you can perform various actions. And something I just want to clear out here, something that we call CRUD operations, which represents create, read, update, and delete. So that's we call them CRUD operations on rows in a table. So you could perform various actions, or we call them CRUD operations again, on rows in a table. So let's go to a demo that's going to be really fast. So I'm just going to take that away. Can you see my desktop right now?
I do, yep.
All right. So what you see right now, you see the presentation, right?
I sure do.
Yeah. So what I need to do right here is just switch to something else. Just want to show you this. All right. So now you see the SQL Management Studio. Yep. So this is I'm connecting against the SQL Management Studio, and as you can see here, it's blue. So the server is called the darkside.databasewindows.net. Awesome. And the database itself is called Darth Baser. All right, so I just want to make it as easy as possible so people could relate to things, Love it. So this is how kind of like connect. So if you want to create a database within Azure, so what you do is actually you connect to Azure. You open up Azure, you create a resource, and then you open up SQL database, and then you have to set all the properties. Probably if you're a power user and familiar with that, so you could do that yourself. But if you're not, probably you have to relate to somebody else to help you with that, because there's a lot of information, a lot of things that you need to know, if you like, from the IT pro, as a dev, as whatever. So you need to know these information. What does it mean if you set up this configuration or not? And definitely, if you're trying to do that within Azure, that means like if you're doing one thing or the other, that means it's going to cost you money in some way or the other. So you have to know what you're trying to do. So that's something is very important. This is how it looks like. So this is my database. It's called Darth Baser, and the server itself is called the dark side. So the server, instead of setting up the whole SQL on-prem yourself. So Microsoft have already set that for us. So I've only supplied the name. I want to call the server the dark side, and then I said I want to create a database. It's called Darth Baser. Okay. And from there, once it's created, I could use the Management Studio, which is what you see here, the Microsoft SQL Management Studio. I could connect against this. So this is my database. And here are the tables that I have in my database. Something that's really important I just want to talk about is actually the tables. You could create new tables, and this definitely will create this against the Azure database that you have created. And of course, if you're a developer against the database, you need to know how to create store procedures, because we're going to execute a store procedure from flow. And that's something really important to know. So probably if you're a power user, developers against the database will be doing the store procedure for you. And then you could just list all the flow will list all the store procedures available for you based on your the account that you've connected with, and based on the access rights for that account, it will show all the available store procedures. So here's one store procedure, and it's get all by month and year. We'll come back to that later, but this is how it looks like. This is the SQL part. All right. So I think by that, we should go back again to our slides. So I'll just share the slides back again. So you guys should be seeing the slides.
Yep. I see your desktop. There we go. Got it.
All right. Okay. So we're done with that part. And so we have a couple of triggers, or at least only one couple of triggers. So it's a SQL Connector triggers. We have one when an item is created, and the other one when an item is modified. So for this part, it's only two types of triggers that we have against the SQL Server. And I'm not going to be showing that in the demos because it works exactly the way as it works against any other, products from Microsoft when something is created or modified. So we're not going to be showing that because it's just straightforward. And it's going to be returning all the records that actually got created or got modified. So it just simply works exactly the same, like as if something item was created in SharePoint or modified in SharePoint. So it works exactly the same.
And those two words just tied to new, right? If it's created, that's something brand new. If it's modified, it's something not new that was changed.
Exactly.
And so that's the differentiation between those two triggers.
Exactly. And those are only the only two triggers available within the SQL Server connector. So now we'll move on to the actions. So we have the create, which is insert row. We have the read, and the read have multiple actions tied to that. We have get row, if you know the ID of the row. We have get rows, if you want to get all the rows of a specific table. And we have Power Query, which is actually, if you want to slice and dice your data and then get the data back. And that's something very familiar to the Power users, because Power users usually use Power Query even in Excel. So it's something that they are very familiar with. So if they want to use Power Query as well against an SQL database, that's also available within Flow. It's something very brilliant.
Awesome.
And we have update, of course, update a row, and we have delete row, and we have execute. So the execute is actually, we have two types of actions that supports the execute. First one is actually execute a native query, which that you have to write the query yourself within Flow and then execute it from Flow. And that means, probably I'll just get back to that. But the other type is the store procedure, which is the one that I showed within the SQL part. So there's like a list of store procedures. And once you get that store procedure, it will lay down all the parameters that you need to pass to that store procedure. But, because I'm a developer, I have to just, tell the difference between these two. When you write something in a native query, like what we mean by native query, we write the query against the SQL outside of SQL, not inside of SQL. So when you do the execution for this, it means it has to go to SQL first and then verified by the SQL engine that this is a valid query and then gets executed. But in a store procedure, it's more secure. It's already been validated. So definitely it's faster. You're not gonna, feel the difference about that when you're doing, different queries if the table is not that big. But when there's the data gets bigger and bigger, and you're gonna feel the difference that the store procedure executes even faster than a normal SQL query. So that's something that you need to take into account. But also, Microsoft is just trying to give the possibility for everybody to do whatever they want. if they don't want to, you know, do stored procedures, they're free to do some SQL queries as well in Flow. So that's something really nice. But at the same time, we always recommend that you use stored procedures. It's secure, safe, faster. So
Good to know.
that's
Good
it.
to know.
Last thing is actually get tables, which is basically you just get the tables off a database. And that's something we are not going to be showing as well here. It's something that if you want to see all the tables, and then you want to pass these tables and do queries against the tables. If you want to have the table itself as a parameter when you're executing an SQL, it's handy here. But we're not going to be doing any demos for the get tables action. All right, and that's actually moves us to the demos. So for
Awesome.
this one, I'm gonna be sharing my browser. So I'll get to that in a minute. So where is my browser? I think it's this one.
Desktop.
All right. So we are on the right one right now. So as you can see here, I have a lot of demos here. So we have the get salary, blah blah blah, etc., etc. So if you remember when I was just doing the when I was doing the SQL demo, I showed you the table. So what we have in the table is actually it's good now to share the table as well. So what I'll do is actually just share the SQL first, and then I'm going to show. All right. So we are back again to the SQL server. So what we see here is actually we have the Darth baser, and we have the server itself. All right. Yep. And something before I forget, once we get back to Flow, I'm going to show how we built the connector, and then we go to the flows. And so something that we need to remember, first we have the server and the database, and then we have the username and password to connect against the database.
Okay.
And before we leave this, we have the Darth baser, which is our database, and we have one table which is called salary slips. All right. And in the salary slips, we have a column that's called ID, employee name, email, month, year, and salary. So basically what we document in here is the salary slips that we sent to the employees based on the month and year and what was the salary. It's very simple. I'm not trying to make it as like a real live demo, but this is what we're getting. And as you can see here, the employees are actually from the dark side, stormtroopers, Darth Vader, and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. We can see some corruption over here because this guy is actually just manipulating the numbers as we go through the years. So yeah. All right. So this is our database, and this is the data that we have here. So now I'm going to switch back again to Flow. And here we are. Okay. So we go to the connections here. And because I have a lot of connectors, I'll just connect it against a lot of stuff. What I'm going to select is actually the SQL server. Just taking time. So I'm going to search for the SQL server. So we have the SQL server. I'm going to open this up and click on edit. So once you want to create a connector against database, this is exactly what you get. Whether you're trying to create the connector within the flow itself, or trying to connect the connection from connections or from connectors. So this is exactly the same view that you see. So first of all, what you need to supply is the name of, or this is just a display name.
That's a display name, yep.
Yeah. So the first thing is that you need to decide whether this is cloud services, it lives in Azure, or whether this is on-prem. So even though if your machine is a virtual machine in Azure, that means it's on-prem. It's not like a cloud service. The cloud service, it means that if you only connect to this, or if you created an Azure SQL database, that's the only way that you can connect to cloud services. The other one is actually if you're connecting to a machine that has a SQL server, whether this machine is on-prem, really on-prem, your prem, or whether in Azure. So it means that you're connecting against the machine. It means that this is on-prem because it's using a domain. All right, the first thing that you need to supply is the SQL server name. The second thing is the database name. And here you have to supply a username and a password. So when you create that within Azure, you have to supply a username and a password. And this is what we supply here as well. And once we put in the username and password, you're ready to go because you have your connector up and ready. And this is what you need to do. The only difference here, when you use the on-prem, if you click on-prem, you will have a choice to select whether you have a SQL user or you have a usual user like a Windows user. That's the only difference. The other stuff is just the same.
Cool.
All right. So we'll go back again to our flows. And we go to the first one, which is the insert. I'll open this up and open edit. It's very simple. What I'm doing here is I'm just pulling the button trigger or manually trigger a flow. And I have a couple of parameters. I have to send into the database, the employee name, email, month, year, and salary.
So
and what
one thing before you go on real quick, I want to just say to the audience, when you see this manual trigger here, what he's putting here is a form, basically. And so this form could come from anywhere. So if you guys are using SharePoint forms, could come from SharePoint forms. If you're using Microsoft forms, could be Microsoft forms. Power Apps forms, Power Apps forms. No matter where you're collecting information, pay less attention here to the trigger and more attention to the actions and how he's mapping the input data from that form to the fields that are required in his tables. I think that's the important part to point out. Don't pay any attention to the triggers. It's just a form, and any form will work the same. All right, go ahead.
Exactly. So what John's trying to say is, well, if you have your data sitting in SharePoint and you want to integrate your data from SharePoint to SQL, you could do that. So for example, when you create an item within SharePoint, you want to move the data to SQL, that's also possible. But what I'm trying to do here is just to make it as simple as possible, and that's why I've used the button trigger, because everybody is just familiar with that. And I've added these inputs. And I'm using string because it's just safer. And once I get to that part, I just convert to the data type that I have in the database. So the data types in the database is actually the employee name is string, the email is string, the month is integer, and the year is integer, and the salary is decimal, but I could use float as well. So I could just put decimal values within. So I could just, I converted that to float. So the value passed in from salary, I convert that to float. This is to integer from year, and this is to integer from month. And email and employee name, I just pass them as is. So as you can see here, when you open this up, it just lists down all the tables that you have against that database that you connected against. So if we have multiple tables, we could just get multiple values here. But because we have only one table, we just have the salary slips. And that's why. We could just do a quick test, and I'll perform the test data. And as you can see, we could just here say storm trooper, let's say
8.
8.
5.
All right.
Yeah, there you
go. All right. And no, not this one, but probably I could just take the email here from this one and paste it in here like that. And the month, let's say for January, and the year of 2019. And we just, just give him a little bit.
A little less. A
little less.
He needs to work on his aim.
Yeah. So this is successfully inserted into the database. And once you insert anything to the database, there are some return values that comes back, which are actually the same values that you have entered from the form. And that's it. We'll get back again to the database once we are done with all the modification through Flow, so I could show you everything in the database. But now we move to the other one, which is the update salary slip. All right, so I'll just edit that. I'm exactly using the same thing, exactly the same thing. The only difference here is that you have to supply the row ID, which means that you have to set in the ID for that item. And we have the ID for the item because we have an identifier. And what does it mean here by row ID? It means that the identifier, when you create a table with an SQL server, you have to set a column as an identifier. So it identifies that this is the row with this data. So what it means here, it says row ID. We named it ID, but probably somebody else would name it 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter. But what says here, it says row ID, and that represents the identifier for that column, all right, for that table, sorry, for that row, the row that you want to update. So here it says row ID. So we set 4. We already have 4. We could supply that as well from the input as well if we know the row ID. But I'm just setting that as a static value. Employee name and the email and month, year, salary is exactly the same as that. But as you notice here, when you are using the update row action, you have to fill in all the data for that row. So you have to pass in everything. So I totally recommend if you want to update one value, use a stored procedure. So probably you would just pass in the ID for that row, and probably you want to update the salary or year or month or whatever. So you just set that 2 values you need to pass into that stored procedure, and that's it. You don't have to pass everything. All right. So what we're doing here is just updating the salary for this one. Let's see the last one that we've added. I'm just gonna go and check what was the ID. It was the ID 14. And you remember, guys, that we gave him 1500? Yeah, yep. So we're gonna upgrade that guy because of poor guy. So we just put here 18. And we're just gonna save here. All right, and then test that. And I'll perform the trigger. Continue. What we do here is just storm trooper 8 is the same. The email is the same, and the month is the same. Year is the same, but the salary is poor guy. So we're probably gonna say like 2000. All right.
Yeah, he'll feel better about that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, failed. Why is that?
There's no 18.
No, I'm pretty sure that we have 18. Oh, it's 14. Sorry. That's my bad. So I'll just edit that one more time. That's my bad. It's 14. Save. And then we'll test that again, perform that ourselves, and then storm trooper 8 again, and then this guy, and then month first in 2019, and then 2000. All right, and we'll run the flow.
He'll feel a little better about 2000.
Now he'll feel better because the database got updated.
There we go.
All right, so we go to the database. I'm just going to check if it got updated. Yes. All right, back again. So this is for the update salary slip. All right. And then we go to get a salary slip by ID. So say that you know the salary slip by its ID. Say that this company is actually issuing the salary slips by the name of the employee and the ID of the salary slip. So probably as an HR, you probably would know the ID. I'm just guessing.
You know that Steve is 18 and Ahmad is 19 and John is 16.
No. So those are actually salary slips. So each month they will have their own salary slip ID depending on the month, because we're generating the salary slip every month, right? So we're going to have different ID every month for each employee. All right. So what we're doing here is actually we're getting the salary slip for exactly that guy. And this is a really good way to show you that the data got updated. So we're going to pass in the salary slip ID, which was 14. Not 18.
Yeah, 14.
And then we're going to get the row. We're going to get one row. And then we're going to pass in the data and then send this as an email. So we're going to make sure the details is correct.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to test that. And we're going to perform that ourselves. Salary slip ID 14, not 18.
Yep.
I'll run the flow and okay. And everything seems fine right now. Once we open this, we should get the email. And as you can see here, that we've requested the salary slip ID 14, employee stormtrooper 8 for month January 2019, and it's 2000. It's been already updated.
Perfect.
So this is working.
That's awesome.
All right, so we go back again. Let's go back again and do the get salary slips by month and year.
Okay.
So first we'll do this one, and then we go to the SP. SP means stored procedure, but this one is actually that's something that we need to supply by the form or the button. Sorry. So we'll do edit, and what I'm doing here is actually I'm passing in the month and the year for which I need the salary slips for the whole that month,
okay.
or for that year specifically. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just using get rows, and here I'm using the filter query, and this works exactly the same as within the OData. This does not work the same as it works in SQL, but it works the same as well as an OData. So when you pass in here, make sure that you're fully aware of what you're passing, because back in your head, you're thinking that probably I need to pass in an SQL query, but that's not, because this is using APIs. So it should pass something that's API compatible.
Would you open up one of those so we could see what your expression is to pass?
Yeah, so what I'm passing here is actually text, which represents the month. I'm converting that to integer because I'm sending that as a string from the button, but I'm converting that into integer because SQL is expecting an integer.
Perfect.
And here and year is equal to the text _1, which is the year, but I'm converting that in here because I'm sending this from the button as string, but I'm converting this within the query here as an integer because SQL is expecting an integer.
Got it. Awesome.
All right, so this is actually filtering right now. And here I just use the compose or create HTML, table. And I pass in the values that got back from the rows. And I send that as an HTML table. So it just looks great within the email. Yep. And that's it, as simple as this. All right, so I'll just test that. And I'll perform the trigger. And I'll pass in that for, let's say, February 2019.
So did you have records for February? I don't know if you had any of those in the day. Okay.
Yes, I do.
All right, cool.
And then when you open this up, you'll get the data for like Stormtrooper 1, 2, 3, and Darth Vader, and the salaries, and the year, and the month.
Man, I want Darth Vader's salary.
Yeah, I want that too.
That's a good month.
Exactly. I want that too.
Uh-huh.
All right. So notice here that there's a lot of data that comes back from the get rows. And if you want to filter the data the right way, you have to write something within the JSON and then filter the data based on a schema. And that actually needs extra work. So instead of doing that, what you could do is use the next flow that we have in here. We go back again. And then we execute the one with actually a store procedure. So we go here and edit this. Is exactly the same. I'm passing month and year. The only difference here is actually I have the store procedure because I'm connecting against this database and it's listing all the store procedures available there. So I could open here and select this get all by month and year. And once I select that, here it actually automatically will show me month and year, and I have to fill in the month and year and have pass it to that procedure.
Okay.
And I'm doing exactly the same here. The only thing I'm passing the results from the store procedure, which is table 1, result sets table 1. I'm just passing that to create HTML, and I'm exactly doing the same. I'm sending an email.
Cool.
And I'll do tests, and we'll do for a different month. Let's say January 2019, and run the flow. It ran successfully. Should get an email by now. And here's the email.
Nice.
Look at that.
All that extra
And I can
info
remove
out of the way.
Out of the way. So I could remove the ID as well. I could do that. But that depends on the store procedure itself. So if you want to remove that, you just go edit the store procedure and you'll get employee name, email, month, year, and salary, for example. So if you want to remove everything out of the way, it will just return a very clean JSON from the in the execute store procedure. It's way better, I think, than the get rows, personally. But because I'm a developer, I know how to write store procedures. Probably you're not, so it's just going to be difficult. But you could do that as well with what? You could do that with the Power Query, which is something I'm going to be showing right now because we don't have a flow for that, but I'm going to show you how you're going to do that with the Power Query. So here, I'm just going to write SQL and then choose the SQL. And here, what I'm going to do is transform data using Power Query. And here I create a query. Once I click on this, I'll have a box, which is something very familiar if you're a Power user and you're slicing and dicing data within Excel. You should be familiar with that because you understand when you have a source of data, you select the sources of data first, and then it will show you the data that is available in the database here. So you just click next, and now just show me that I got the source, navigation 1. I don't know why. I think it's just navigation is, no, okay, no, that's correct. So what I need to do is get data. I'll do that again, and now it should work. All right, so that's correct. So here's the data. Probably I want to, let's say, remove columns from this. So I said just transform table or manage columns, choose columns. And I say, I don't want the ID. I don't want the email, for example, and I just want that. So I get this data. And once I create this query should return exactly the same thing that I want. Instead of just creating a store procedure, you get the result sets from the transform of the Power Query. And then you send it back, you should get the same data.
Whoa.
So that's something that if you're not familiar with how to work with SQL, you could work with Power Query and create something that's really nice. And the
That
people
was
that they
awesome.
want, yeah. And people, if they want to slice and dice data, even add some more data if you have a relational database and there's like a lot of related tables together, you could do a lot of transformations within the Power Query within Flow. So you don't have to go to SQL to do that. You do that from Flow. You create your own query, you define whatever you want, and you're ready to go. You turn the data, just probably send it as an email.
Dude, Ahmad, I feel like you just made me feel like SQL data was now suddenly within my reach, whereas like SQL is not something that I've ever felt like, oh, I feel like, oh, I can't mess with that. That's out of my realm. I don't know how to write a SQL query, but using Power Query and some of that, like how you just made it look so easy, like managing columns like that. I didn't know that it was that simple. That's rad.
Yeah, it's really powerful. It's just got a name Power Query, so just deserve that name.
Yeah. That's super cool. That is super, super cool.
So I did exactly as I did with the store procedure, but instead here is what I did is I did that within the Power Query.
Well,
But
it's
just
like it took less time and less knowledge, and like anyone, you just showed it in a way that anyone could do that in 2 seconds. And so now I don't need any of that SQL knowledge to go write that particular stored procedure. That's something very simply done now in Flow.
The only thing that I hope right now is actually that this action will get to the next level, which just accepts parameter. That will just make it awesome.
In Power Query, you mean?
In Power Query.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Man, we should vote on that. We should create an idea for that in the
I totally agree.
Cool. Okay, do you have any more demos?
So we'll go back again here to we already done that in this, and then we have just the last two,
Okay.
or probably the last one actually.
Okay.
So the last one is actually get salary slip by ID, which is a native query within Flow. So what I'm doing here is actually I'm passing a salary slip ID. I'm doing exactly the same as I did for get ID, but instead I'm writing an SQL query within Flow. So if you're familiar with SQL queries, you just write your query here and just send in the parameters from Flow itself.
Okay.
So I wrote here an SQL query, select ID, employee name, email, month, year, salary, everything. And then I create a table and then I sent that to as an email.
Awesome.
So probably I don't want the ID. I want the ID out of the way. So I could do this. I could save the flow. And now I don't have to define parameters because I could send the value right in within the query because the value passed in from the button right into the query.
Nice.
So what I do, I'll just do a test here and I'll perform a test and I have to pass in the ID. Our friend is with seller ID 14 and run the flow. See, it actually took time until it actually execute the data. Just need to make sure that this is a correct SQL query.
Still pretty fast.
Now, that was fast though as well.
Yeah.
So we have the data. So we got Stormtrooper without an ID, and we got the email, we got the month, the year, and the salary, exactly as in within the database. I think with those demos, we don't need to go back to the database because we know that the data got updated.
Yep.
And we've seen the data that the data got updated. And now we'll jump to the last part, which is the limitation. We're done with the demos.
All right.
So we'll go to the last part and we will share the PowerPoint. And all right. So the last thing, the known issues and limitations. Store procedures cannot be invoked from Power Apps. So because what we're talking about here, we're talking about Flow. We're not talking about Power Apps. I totally understand. But once you create a connector, you think that it should be shared like within the Power Platform. But the problem is that you can't run store procedure or invoke store procedure from Power Apps. But I have good news. And this is a really good credit for Flow. The workaround is to create a flow and invoke the store procedure from Flow. Call the flow from Power Apps and then invoke that store procedure. So this is the workaround. Insert an update to a table does not work if you have a SQL Server side trigger defined on the table. So on SQL Server itself, we have something that's called triggers. So if you define the trigger to be executed on the SQL Server side, not from Flow, I'm just talking about SQL right now. If you've defined a trigger and then the insert and update won't work. But the workaround is actually, it's either you use store procedures or native query, or what you could do is just remove the trigger from SQL table. These are the only two workarounds I could just think of. But insert and update does not work, but you could still use the store procedure and the native query. They should work good for you. When invoking a store procedure on a non-premise SQL server, the output values and output parameters are not returned. That's kind of a bummer, but yeah, that's a limitation. Return value is not available. that when you do that on-prem, when you're invoking a SOAP procedure on an on-prem SQL server, only the first result set is returned, and dynamic schemes are not supported for result sets. So if you have a dynamic schema that you have defined on the SQL server, it's not supported as part of the result sets. Those are actually something for people that are developers or database developers. They understand totally what I'm talking about.
Right on.
But, you know.
No, this is great. It's great.
Yeah. Number 4 is a primary key is required for the following operations: get item, update item, and delete item. So that's of course, but I don't think that's a limitation. I think that's something that's, you know, obvious or something that you need to have. It's by definition of these things, they should have an ID or a primary key.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was set as part of the known issues, so I've just put that in there. When invoking triggers, a row version column is required for on update items.
What does that mean in English?
So that's if you're invoking a trigger for like, you know, create or modified, a row version column is required for on update items. So if an item is modified, you need a row version column is required for that.
Ah, okay. So then that way you can track your versions, how many times it was changed. Got it. Okay, cool.
Exactly. And an identity column is required for on new items, and that's of course, you know, by definition. The response size limit is 8 megabytes through on-prem SQL server. So more than that is not supported. So if the payload that got returned is more than 8 megabytes, that's not possible to be returned within Flow. SQL native query is not supported for on-prem SQL server, because I think that probably because of the definition of it's going to be validated as it is validated within the cloud. So probably they need to build up something on-prem to validate the native queries. The following data types cannot be used as query option predicates. I think all the date types are not supported for that type. And with this, we wrap up our SQL Flow connector.
Love it.
And thank you very much. Follow me on Twitter, and if you want to, you know, read my blogs, you just go there. Probably I'm more active on Twitter.
So
thank you very much.
Say thank you so much, Ahmad. This was awesome. I learned a ton about SQL, and I actually learned that SQL is not out of my reach.
No, it's not.
No, and I hope for people watching, you feel the same now. Like, I understand now all these actions, and more importantly, I understand with that Power Query how I can actually limit the data and really transform the data a little bit. That was I think my favorite part. So everyone, be sure to go and follow Ahmad on Twitter. He is not only hilarious and smart, but a super cool, kind human being. And so definitely worth the follow. And I will put those links in the description. Ahmad, thanks a lot, bro.
Thank you very much.
All right. And man, what an educational half an hour for me, and I hope for you too. That Power Query thing, I had no idea that it was so simple. I'm definitely gonna check that out. Practical examples, real demos, thorough explanations of all the actions and the triggers. Thanks, Ahmad. I understand SQL way better, and I'm sure all of you guys do too. So, if you want new connectors, if you think that we should review certain connectors and do other videos like this, go ahead and drop those in the comments, all right? Go ahead and click that like button. Go ahead and hit that subscribe. As always, much love from me. See you guys in the next video.